a wonderful group here, and they represent a very interesting mix of academia. And Fernando from BU, he's a strategist. He teaches strategists how to be strategists. So everything kind of starts from there. He's like the Old Testament and the New Testament. Okay. So that's a great place. That's a great place to start. George is at MIT, and George is. I'm not going to try and provide a parody of each of their bios, which you can read on the internet. But my understanding of some of the most interesting work that George has done is trying to understand how do threats within large organizations convert themselves into innovation opportunities, and certainly how what role does information technology and other technologies play a role in sort of facilitating that transformation from a threat into an innovation opportunity. And Mike, going outside the large organization, the role of the unwashed masses, right? The startups. How do we then connect the large with the small? Well, having listened to all the speakers this evening, and this is just a fantastic group. And I mean, I always feel proud. I mean, I don't know how many times I've heard this thing about the East versus the West Coast conflict. There's no question. We are far better. We're far more interesting. Just all those guys who are on the camera, forget about it. We definitely have a much more interesting mix of issues here, and just the sheer array of companies that we've heard from, whether it's an IBM or an Intuit or an EMC or a Biogen IDEC. This is just a these guys are the world beaters. Now, having set that up, I think this is a real challenge for us as academics, because the expectation from this group is what next, right? So all these guys have read Clay Christensen, they've read all that open innovation stuff, they read every single issue of Harvard Business Review that you're going to quote and cite and have probably planned for, and they've implemented them. Some of them have failed, some of them are successful, some of them are still pointing along. So they're not interested in hearing any of that stuff anymore. Okay, so we need to now look forward, right? In the next 10 years, what's going to come out in the HBR or the Sloan Management Review, or pick your journal of choice in 2025, right? And it's actually going to reappear in 2035 as that this theory still works. Okay, so I'm going to hold our collective feet to the fire, to make that happen, because we have to be the cutting edge, right? And now I'm going to make a slight distinction between this August group and me, because for one, I'm going to stand on their shoulders. They're much smarter than I am. Second, I get to pose the questions. They give all the hard, the answers. So if I may kind of suggest that there are kind of three things that keep me awake at night, and I'll just sort of declare that up front. That may shape some of the discussion as it goes forward. But I would love to kind of, for us to return to some of these issues, because I haven't heard that addressed in some of the corporate discussions so far and the academic discourse. So I'll give you sort of three things, and there are actually 10 things, but night is short, and I'll just give you three. My past is as an applied mathematician, so I tend to frame things in terms of sort of cute problems. So cute problem number one is the Goldilocks problem, which is that Goldilocks is a choice between the little bear, who's very nimble, can have lots of fun, do lots of creative and interesting things, but can primarily reach the low-hanging fruit. These are the really creative entrepreneurs who make up the base. We're in a presidential election season here, so the base, the core of TiE. Right, I mean, you guys are the cutting edge, and it's the low-hanging fruit, and then maybe the low-hanging fruit reaches up to the high-hanging fruit, but the high-hanging fruit is accessible by the big bear, the guys out there. Now, at the same time, Goldilocks has a problem that the question is if I what kind of porridge am I going to get if I try and locate too close to the big bear. Then the porridge is too hot, and I will just be burnt by the CFO of the business unit. with whom I'm attached. And the CFO is going to demand all kinds of things from me which I will not be able to deliver. On the other hand, if I'm hanging out with a little bit, and if I'm sort of out in some underground bunker, then I'm frozen out. Then the big bear is not going to carry my products in the sales bags, and essentially I'm potentially I don't have access to the fruit that's up there. So there's a Goldilocks problem that we need to kind of figure out. How does the large organization and the nimble entrepreneur potentially collaborate to solve some of the hardest problems that we have? Speaking of the hardest problems, the second problem that I would like to frame, which I would call the Sex in the City problem. There's a lot of big milestones that we're going through these days. One major milestone is that we are now a more urban society than a non-urban society. More people are living in cities. And more people are living in cities, more people are having sex. More people are having sex. There's a problem of making sure that there's family planning available. There's prevention from AIDS. There is public health. There's clean water. All kinds of stuff. Right? How do we solve these fundamental problems that are now emerging from the fundamental rebalancing of economic power that is happening around the world? And these problems, by the way, cannot be solved by 100 NGOs doing 100 little things. Yes, they're doing wonderful things, but these are problems that are affecting billions of people. So we need to figure out how do we scale up these fantastic ideas that are coming up. Okay, and there's a third problem that I will kind of hold my horses on for a moment, and I'll actually come back to it as we get further into this. So if I may ask Fernando, as you think about this from the perspective of the strategist, strategy is about being, creating a competitive advantage and doing something that's compelling to a target customer and being able to sustain and regenerate and renew that advantage. What's the role of innovation? How has that changed, and how is that changing?
Okay, well, first of all, thanks a lot for inviting me, and thank you guys for staying. I mean, you're the great ones, staying until late. For me, it's a pleasure, actually, because when I studied, when I did my PhD, there was only a few schools, actually, that concentrated on innovation. A few of the strategy schools, and MIT was one of them. I got my PhD there. And if you fast forward 20 years, there's a lot going on already. Most of the strategy departments actually are innovation departments as well. In fact, 5 years ago, we actually changed at Boston University. We sort of rearranged the departments, and the department that I had is called Strategy and Innovation, because it's such an important topic. Most of the schools are doing similar stuff. In fact, MIT 2 years ago, they also combined their strategy and their innovation department into one. So, there's a trend there that innovation is becoming more and more important for strategy. And I think, many of the cases, I was actually very impressed by the panel speakers that you've had so far. And many of the examples actually that you had here, like Intuit and everything, we actually use in our classes because it's such an interesting, group of companies that are trying new things. And I think, what some of the challenges that we're facing, we get a lot of executives from different companies in our executive education programs. One of the challenges we face is that this issue that you describe, Bhaskar, as the small firm versus the large firm and stuff like that, actually, I think the more pressing issue is because there will always be small firms, and the small firms are, sometimes are acquired by the large firms and everything. I think the larger issue is how do you get the spirit of the small firm and the power of the large firms together into one? And how actually can you go over and keep on growing and be, sort of nimble as a small firm and powerful as a big firm without losing any of it? And this is something that, in organizational theory, we have been sort of discussing for a long time. In 1991, there was this professor from Stanford, Jim Marsh, that published a very seminal article that basically said, their organizations typically pursue two broad sets of activities. One of them is exploitation of what they do, their current business, and one of them is exploration. What kind of new things are discovered there and everything. And so, And he said, here's the basic tension and dilemma that we have to resolve. And maybe this is the HBR 2020 that we need to have a good solution for this. Because I'll tell you what we know, but really we don't know enough. And so basically he was saying the problem with this is that if you look at what is needed for exploitation and what is needed for exploration, there are different things. I mean, if you need exploitation, you actually need to focus on cost and efficiency. You need, sort of certain processes. You need sort of a mechanistic organization. And and of course, that would be sort of a more hierarchical organization as well. And it's a risk-averse organization because you cannot be messing around with the products when you're actually producing to sell them in the market. So, and if you look at exploration, it's actually the opposite. You need flat organizations. You need actually to be nimble, respond rapidly, take risks, and many of the things that we've been hearing here. So, in a way, there is an inherent tension because to succeed in the long term, organizations need both. Need this. So, in the last, I would say, 5 to 10 years, we've been sort of starting to think about, how do we do this? How do we actually come up with organizations that are both exploiting and exploring? And, I've come to believe, and there are many people actually that have done work in this, including George, the thesis advisor, Michael Dushman, who is a very well-known professor, and he does work in this area. And I've come to, after looking at all of this, I've come to believe that this is really sort of a continuum between exploitation and exploration. And it's not like you are in this mode and that mode. Organizations really can sort of locate themselves in this continuum. Let me give you a couple of examples. So, I mean, if you think of a continuum going from exploitation, exploiting the current businesses, exploration, creating new businesses through innovation and stuff like that. A company that was mentioned just a little while ago, a company that will be sort of in the exploration side, it's a company like Apple. Apple has reinvented markets. They have created huge. Somebody just mentioned, I think it was you, Mike, but Apple has created this $1 billion market, stuff like that. And it's actually quite interesting, and they have done that really well. I think if you look at what has happened with Apple in the last 10 years, is that in addition to doing that exploration, which is their main thing, they're really focused on that. They've also got really good at exploitation. In fact, we used to say that Apple users would actually pay an Apple tax because everything was so expensive and everything. Well, it turns out that if you look at the logistics of Apple and the prices of the product, if you control by quality, they're not that expensive, and their cost structure, that's the most interesting thing, is actually as good as it gets for the large companies in the market. Let me give you an example from 2 minutes. An example from the other side. You have a company like Nike, for instance. Nike is a company that is very good at exploiting what they do. They are innovators as well, a little bit. But if you think of their innovations, they're really innovations to freshen up their products and to link more people to their products. They remember the sensor on the shoe and everything that sort of added value to their products. And in fact, when you look at this, you don't see them building new markets like Apple is doing. You don't see growing really rapidly what Apple and so Nike is it's a $14 billion, $20 billion company. Apple is is one of the fastest growing companies today. And so the question is, can you be in the middle? Can you be both exploring and exploiting at the same time? And I think when people ask me for examples for that, the best example that comes to mind is Amazon.com. I mean, if you think of Amazon.com, it's an incredible company because in a very tough industry, retailing, believe me, retailing is an industry with razor-thin margins. Okay, Walmart, which is sort of the gold standard in this, has margins of about 3.5% return on sales. And when you look at Amazon, they've been able to compete on that level, but at the same time create this whole new market. Amazon.com today would be $1 billion cloud computing company as well. You would mention cloud computing. They have created this huge platform. They have, with the Kindle Fire, you name it. I mean, they have created more and more. So I think, what we're trying to learn today, and I'll stop so that you can keep on going with questions, is that, there are ways of doing it. And there have been some proposals in the literature on how to do this. There's one idea that actually you can spin off units and give them a lot of autonomy, some coordination at the senior level, and you can actually, with that, you can start creating this new business without losing the focus on the exploitation of the current business. Okay. There's also a lot of work on organizational culture and how can you do both things. But I think, to be honest with you, we haven't found the solution. I mean, we're looking at these cases like Amazon. Amazon today, by the way, is a $50 billion company. And guess what the rate of growth was from last year to this year? I mean, the last year, it's 40%, 40. And the prior year, 40%, like 39.5. So, this is the growth of this company. And I think, we're trying to understand how it works. And we don't have the solution yet, but, hopefully we'll have it by 2020.
Fernando, thank you. Thank you. That's a fantastic. You stayed at the 24-mile level, and you actually jumped down, but not all the way to Earth, but down to about 15 miles before your parachute opened. And we are waiting for you to come down while this conversation proceeds. But this is a fantastic sense of both hope and some fear that we're going to experience. But this whole notion of how does one balance this tension between exploitation and exploration, the ambidextrous organization, which is Mike Tushman's term, perhaps is best experienced from kind of learning about how what companies are doing different going forward. When I've been in this business for 20 years, this has basically been what I've been doing every single day, trying to figure out, work with companies on how to strike that balance. And every single day I get out of bed because we haven't solved the problem. So I am completely sympathetic to the dilemma that you talked about now. So George, looking at it from inside the large organization, how do you see, where do you see the 2025 vision for, can we get better at this?
We can definitely get.
Do that? You want to try this? Okay.
We can definitely get better at this, and a lot of companies have done it. One of the great things about being here tonight is watching some of these large companies that are really learning to dance with innovation. Because if you think about this exploitation problem, everything in your company has been created to push you to exploitation. Every capital budgeting question that happens, every hurdle you have to jump through on a project, every kind of checkout is all aimed at driving all the risk out of what you're doing. And in essence, driving all the innovation on what you're doing too. So no wonder all you get is the incremental work. And so what it takes is this idea of ambidexterity to be able to find ideas and to push them that are going to be in those other horizons. So Deborah talked, for example, about these 3 horizons. Those third horizon ideas do not come up organically in large organizations. And unfortunately, when they do come up organically, the rest of the organization will get its DNA out there and kill it immediately. So what you need to do is to have a real effort to make that happen. Inside these organizations, what Deborah's doing, what other people are doing, what Sean is doing there, what they're doing at EMC and other places to get these ideas to surface is huge. There's a really critical point here, though, and this is for all of you in the room and anybody running a big company, is these ideas will die unless some very senior executives in your company pick them up and make an effort to let these things grow. Because for all the bottom up, all the 1,000 flowers bloom stuff, these things just get mown over unless a VP picks it up and says, we're going to invest in this. IBM has a really interesting process, actually, the EBO process, on top of some other things that they talked about today, where that's what they do. They incubate ideas, and the head of strategy and the most senior people in the company are running these efforts on a regular basis to try to grow them into the next billion-dollar business for the company. So this takes not only the idea of bubbling up ideas and coming up with creativity, but some smart senior executives who are willing to say, it's not about just this quarter, it's about investing in something that will keep on going. That's this idea of the ambidexterity. I may keep my major business running, but I'm going to have a couple things going that I'm investing in on a regular basis to try to get them from Horizon 3 to Horizon 2 and into something we can build on. One of the reasons that companies have to acquire so often instead of growing themselves is because they kill too many ideas. And so what they'll do is they'll let the market figure out the ideas and then they overpay to get them. There should be better ways for companies to work here. Now, of course, all of you as entrepreneurs, you want them to overpay for you, but big companies are still looking for ways to solve this internally. If I were to talk, though, about one idea that has not been mentioned today, and I think it's really worth talking about, all of the ideas out there, we hear about new products, big investments in new drugs, big investments in new financial products or anything else like that. Inside large organizations, there's also tremendously fertile ground for innovation that's process innovation. Can we take the things that we're doing internally, the way that we do business, make them a little more efficient, make them radically more efficient, or completely redesign them? This is a huge opportunity, and we don't always talk about it in the innovative space. I'm finding in my research that with as few as 4 or 6 or 8 people, a $10 billion company can get into this process innovation space. And I've kind of identified some ways on how you build these things, 6 elements that you put together to make it work. So if you are an entrepreneur, don't just think about that next $1 billion product innovation process or the product that you could sell. Think about how you might be able to get a process innovation that everybody can have. These ideas go from a bank in Brazil that wanted to just cut the lengths of the lines in the bank lobbies in half. And rather than doing a whole lot of money invested to figure this out, they put a laptop on a tray with a long wire, a cash drawer, and a printer. And they just went through and cherry-picked transactions out of the line and immediately cut things in half. That demonstration cost them maybe $10 to do and some time. They rolled that out across all the bank branches they had, and immediately customer satisfaction went up. BP does this kind of stuff with 12 to 15 people for hundreds of millions of dollars of value that they deliver. Intuit has done this in different teams that they've done. Other people have done it. So don't forget about the idea of business process innovation in large companies. Tremendously fertile. I can share more later on how you run these innovation teams, but you don't need to spend a lot of money, and there's a lot of value out there.
Oh, okay, great. Well, we have multiple technologies here, which is only appropriate for this group. So George, thank you. It suggests that we need to kind of look outside the kind of the classic domains that typically, not everybody, but typically we're focusing on, which is sort of very product oriented, technology oriented. Kind of how do you make a better box, or maybe a better looking box these days? We all kind of Steve Jobs acolytes, and better looking boxes are just as important as better boxes. But the whole notion of processes is underappreciated technological and innovation edge, and so something that we love to kind of pick up on. The second idea, which is how do we manage this tension within the large organization? Should we allow the intrapreneurs, hiding somewhere in the organization, hiding for long enough that they don't get blown up or don't get closed up, and or kind of going outside, and maybe you overpay when you go outside. But then invariably the challenge that we often face is A, you overpay, and then Wall Street comes back and hammers you for it. And B, as soon as those guys come inside your organization, all their creativity just dies, and they spend the next 365 days waiting for their their PDP or their lockdown periods to expire, and then they leave because they're pissed off that they're not allowed to use their Macs because the CIO insists on PCs, right? So and these are real problems that all the Intuits and the IBMs and the J&Js of the world will all appreciate. Okay. Now let's go outside the organization, the unwashed masses, the serial entrepreneur. Mike, what's your perspective?
I've been acquired 5 times, and 4 of those times, within 30 days, I was suffocated. And I would say it's exactly that. So I teach the Cisco case, and the Cisco case was written at Stanford in, I believe, 1991. Some of my students are laughing because tomorrow they're getting a final exam. But what is so remarkable to me is that, as simple as it may seem, Cisco had an incredibly open, honest, transparent culture, where they would look across the table at the founding team and they would say, this is what you can expect from us. When we acquire you, you will lose your brand, you will all lose your respective titles, and you're going to work in our system. If you care about scaling your idea globally, you're on our team, come on in. And I have sat on boards of companies that have sold to Cisco. I have had colleagues that have left and gone to Cisco, and they have stayed for 20 years. Cisco has created an extraordinary sandbox for entrepreneurs way ahead of their time. My experience in being acquired was one of hypocrisy and dishonesty, where they would say, and I'll give you one specific example. They acquired us at 7x revenue. They said, we're going to bring you in, we're going to build an aggregation platform around your business. You get to keep the brand, you get to keep your titles, and everything is going to be great. The day the ink dried on that closing doc, they said, oh, we've been rethinking everything. And you're all reporting through us, and your brand will be gone in X days. So there is a continuum. And to me, it's a very simple matter of human nature. If you treat entrepreneurs with transparency and honesty and respect, and you give them the culture to continue to do what they do best, and the premium that you paid for them gets to be exploited, it's pretty simple. So when Cisco started doing this, most of the large iconic tech companies were not startup friendly. Today, every major company in the world is running an entrepreneurial competition. So what I've seen as a faculty member and as an entrepreneur is that the universality of the entrepreneurial mindset, not as a job, but as a mindset and a process, is way more ubiquitous than it has ever been before. But I will tell you that my own personal experience has been, there's a quote that I love that was attributed to Robert Gardner, which was, there is a fine line between entrepreneurship and insubordination. Okay? And I really believe that it captures the incredible tension that organizations find themselves in. So I often see that if you treat entrepreneurs openly, and I think IBM does an incredible job of moving in that direction. I think that GE has done an incredible job of moving in that direction. There's an opportunity to do something great here. I don't think any startup has ever really had the ability to be a world leader without a partnership. I look at what Spotify has done with Facebook. They were nowhere until they joined Facebook. I look at the game over move that Square just constructed with our friends from Starbucks, 17,000 retail operations, de facto standard payment system. You know, they cannot live without one another, although they may not necessarily understand. So that's sort of my perspective.
Thank you, Mike. If I may just kind of ask a follow-up question, and then we'll mix it up with the group. The follow-up question is, I think you make a fantastic point, which is you do need to accommodate and create the right climate for these the unwashed masses to be able to come in and not be forced to use deodorant that they are not that they don't really want to use. That said, large organizations do well because they standardize them. They do exactly the same thing across 450,000 employees. Isn't that what IBM said? And work across every company, every country where they're legally allowed to work. So standardization is key. Harmonization is key. So if one group is using a different or no deodorant, and everybody else is given the company issued deodorant, that's going to cause a lot of problems. How do you resolve that?
I look at my own experiences where we were acquired by a company and there was enough simpatico that we allowed ourselves to be folded in because there was enough corporate honesty. And we took our business from $10 million to $250 million in 1 year. Okay? We got out of the way. We used our IP and our market knowledge, and that market knowledge was respected, and we went into this great machine. IBM likes to say, if you stay in our swim lanes, everything's fine. Just don't leave the swim lane. So if you stay in the swim lane, and you allow the large corporation to exploit the exploration, they start cranking that machine. It's insane how quickly you can scale, right? More often than not, though, as we saw so many times, the business plan gets thrown away, and the company's never given the opportunity to bring their ideas to scale. So I think, again, a lot of it is cultural and process-oriented. That's sort of been my experience across 5 startups that have been acquired.
Great. Well, thank you, gentlemen. I do want to have some time. By the way, how much time do I have? 20 minutes. Wow. Really? Does everybody have 20 minutes? Because this is a conversation that's going to go on for 20 hours. So we're going to try and because now we're about to poke the bees in the hornet's nest or whatever happens to live in the hornet's. Now you guys have done a fantastic job of at least while you're parachuting down from the 24 miles down, giving us a sense of the Goldilocks problem. You still haven't addressed my Sex and the City problem, so I'm a little peeved about that. I'm going to come back to that. But while you're thinking about it, I'll actually throw a third problem at you. The third problem is what I call the who's going to bell the cat problem. Okay, and what that is basically, and this may be an experience that several of you share. Way back I used to work in a large industrial R&D lab, or used to be called Bell Labs, right? And these guys were producing many of those fundamental innovations, those core foundational technologies that all these unwashed entrepreneurs are now building their fundamental, their wonderful companies, or whether it's mobile technologies, or whether it's the World Wide Web, or World Wide Web, of course, funded by European governments, of CERN, or funding of DARPA by the U.S. government, or funding of Bell Labs by the U.S. government, or funding of NASA and Cold War defense expenditures by U.S. and public sector. So all that stuff is gone. We are sitting here in Boston bemoaning the fact that federal money is down, NIH money is down. We don't have any pharma people here. I don't know where they are. They are all complaining that Boston is the capital of biomed. By the way, the NIH is flatlining us to decline. So who's going to bail Labs the cat, right? And it's certainly not happening in the United States. I've been spending some time in China. Well, they seem to be pouring a lot of money into the fundamental stuff. Now, we all dismiss China. We kind of say, oh, those guys are bozos. They follow this Asian model of education. Speaking to a bunch of Indians, so I should think rote memorization, emphasis on engineering and mathematics, that's all bullshit. I mean, what about the broad education, liberal arts, the open-mindedness that America is all about? Absolutely, America. This is why America is the greatest, innovation country in the country in the world and company in the world. But we are missing the bell at the bottom. And where is that going to come from? What's the future? I'm still pushing you guys to 2025. So I still have two unresolved questions. Who's going to take it first?
I'd like to, if I can, I'd like to address the section. And I love the way we package these questions. I've got a lot to learn.
I should make something before I became an academic.
Yeah, you should do. Exactly. But the section city problem is a very interesting problem. And I agree wholeheartedly that the U.S. spends $2 trillion a year across around 29 social programs to bring people out of poverty. And I think we all know how effective that investment has been. I have the good fortune of teaching a Masters of Social Entrepreneurship class at Hult in San Francisco. And what I am seeing, first of all, there's this entrepreneurial renaissance, right? There's this entrepreneurial mindset that's becoming universal everywhere. And that coupled with the idealism of this new generation of master's level students between 22 and 32 is incredibly inspiring and refreshing and reminds me of the 1960s, right? There's that incredible socially and environmentally conscious mindset that I haven't seen in a long time. So I am seeing some great examples of where former Silicon Valley entrepreneurs, former FDA officials are forming social ventures, not looking for charity, but looking to build businesses with real business models to address social problems. So we know One World Health. We know Victoria Hale. We know that extraordinary example of her targeting bacterial diseases that have not been addressed by others, and her ability to get all that IP and drive drug development for $15 million, not $1.5 billion. Remarkably effective. We know Oralab. We know David Green, a very hard-charging Silicon Valley engineer who created intraocular lenses at a $2 price point that were exactly the same quality as the $200 intraocular lenses that are being manufactured by his competition. We see a company like Benetech that is addressing the problem of reading for the blind. Okay? So even people of my generation, older entrepreneurs, have heard the clarion call to address the Sex and the City problem. But I'm inspired equally, if not more, by younger entrepreneurs, like the woman here studying at Harvard Business School today, Jessica Matthews, a Nigerian, who graduated from Harvard 3 years ago, could have gone to Wall Street, could have gone to McKinsey. She went back home to visit her family. She saw the abject poverty in the streets of Nigeria and said, I'm going to do something about it. And she had this ingenious idea of creating a soccer ball that was an energy storage device that could literally store 4 hours of electricity. And with the USB connector, you can actually plug in a light that would light your hut for 4 hours, so you did not have to breathe in the carcinogens of a kerosene stove, right? There's a company called BioLite, and there's a young entrepreneur, PhD entrepreneur, who has created a stove, and he just literally submitted his dissertation because he spent a year and a half living in rural India, rural Ghana, and other parts of Africa. And he is addressing the issue of indoor air pollution based on traditional methods of cooking and how much cancer that causes in the families in India and in China and in Africa. And we talk about design thinking, right? Remarkable example of design thinking, starting with a clean piece of paper and understand the unique needs of how all kinds of flatbreads in India, tortillas in Latin America, perfectly designed and at a price point they can afford. We go on and on.
Great, Michael, thank you. So you just sort of given us a whole range of examples, and I think several of us are going to have taken down notes, and even though we don't know the specifics of the examples, I'm going to go back and check out some of this. Fernando, from the strategist perspective, the soccer balls, the tortilla makers.
Well, let me take the other question perhaps, because you posed two questions, and I think that's a good answer for one of them.
The cat one, we do the rest later.
Fine. So the other question is whether the U.S. is falling behind or not. I think when every time I see those rankings and with the math proficiency and stuff like that, I think you have to be really careful in interpreting those because. And I'm not saying the U.S. couldn't be doing more. I think definitely there's an issue here. But I think there's the problem with the U.S. and you always have to keep this in mind is that when you compare the U.S. to other countries, well, with the exception of the big population countries like China, really, the U.S. is very heterogeneous and it's very actually large. So what happens is that there's a lot of disparity in this. If you would take the top 20%. Of your rankings and compared to the top 20% of those countries, actually there wouldn't be much difference. So our top performers are actually as good as their top performers. So I think that we have an issue of equality here, if you will, in the distribution of talent and education, which is an issue that we have to address. But whether that's an issue that will condemn us to fall behind, I'm not so sure because this is the way the economy works. With a few people creating the ideas and the companies and everything and many other problems. Then there's another issue that when you look at how you will how you create a country that is innovative, it turns out that there are people that have studied this. And there's a very famous professor at Columbia called Richard Nelson. He wrote actually a book which is called National Innovation Systems. And his main point is that when you're trying to create innovation in a country, you really cannot just look at one or two things. You really need to build a whole system of innovation. And that system actually has many components. And one of them is education, but another one is also, how do you motivate students to be creative as opposed to just learn for the exam, which is what many of these countries are doing. And it has to do with, the availability of capital in terms of, angel investors or venture capital or the financial system. And it has to do with the universities, how powerful the universities are and how risk-taking the universities are. And it has to do also with the legal system and, what we call the appropriability system, the intellectual property protection. So there's a whole bunch of things that you have to really put them all in a bag to say, well, this country really has a chance to catch up with the U.S. So, and I think, having, my accent is not fake. I'm actually not, I wasn't born here, so I can tell you for a fact, that when you look at other countries, I was raised in Santiago.
Like everybody else here who came on the Mayflower.
It's actually interesting, I came to the U.S. 7 years ago, and I was living in London for 5 years. I was working for the London Business School. And if you talk to people in the UK, they admire all of that sort of entrepreneurial spirit of the US and everything. If you go to Latin America, back to my home country, there's the same thing. So I think if you go to China, I lived in Japan last year for 6 months, they're also feeling that they lost their innovation power and the US keeps on going, and they see the Facebooks and the Apples and so I think it's a much more complex thing, and the one other thing is that I just want to say and I'll shut up, which is it may be actually a very profound thing. Let me just tell you one story, and I will. And the story is the following. When I went back, when I got my PhD here, I actually went back to my country. So it's not as beautiful a story as your Nigerian student, but I went back to Chile because I was also much younger. I was very idealistic, and I wanted to help the country and everything, And so, and I did, and I created a whole MBA as a future today, very well ranked and everything. So I did a lot of things back in the little country. But one of the things that when my daughter went to school, she had been 3 years here in school, and actually 3 years, and she was going to kinder. And I remember that the first week we came back. and actually there was a note from the teacher in Chile, saying, well, your daughter actually is not following the rules. She actually stands up and grabs the crayon or everything she needs from my table, and she has to understand that she has to raise her hand, ask for permission, and go there, And, and my wife and I looked at each other and say, this is it, this is really where innovation is killed. Because you start with all these little things which are actually built in the system. So I think, what I say with this example is a much more complex thing. Just
you make an excellent point. You make an excellent point. I mean, there's absolutely no doubt that just the environment and the education system in the US is, and we're all beneficiaries of that. And here, we're sitting right here in the neighborhood of an institution that is reasonable. But that said, if you just look at the statistics, 63% of engineering doctorates are the United States, are foreign born. 52% of startups are led by CEOs or head technologists that are foreign born. They typically get their degree from a Tsinghua or an IIT or a school outside the United States. So this is something for us to consider. And the fact is, we're not making it that much easier for the next generation of those guys to get their H-1Bs or whatever happens after that. We're actually making it much harder. And the entire presidential debate rhetoric has not even touched this question, right? Despite the fact that we made China to be the new Russia. And right? So I absolutely agree. At the same time, I think there's a danger of complacency. There's a second part to my bell or my cap question, which is, yes, all of that foundational research is being pushed off to the universities, but the universities are not being given the federal grants. They're not getting the same kind of support that Bell Labs and Xerox PARC and Watson Center and IBM used to get. So where is that going to come from? That's, that question still remains. George, do you want to tackle the sex question, or?
So being raised as a good Catholic boy, I'm not allowed to talk about sex in public. But actually, let me talk about the social bit. As a good Catholic boy, that wasn't it's interesting, like the points that you raised, all the examples of social entrepreneurship are young students all creating things. They're not big companies.
Some are our age, some are people of our generation.
Okay, great.
The first three were, the second three were 22-year-old kids.
So one of the things is, I wonder whether it's fair to ask a large corporation to solve social problems, because there's not a lot of profit there.
Yeah.
And the examples that you mentioned, one of the common things is they tend to have individuals out there whose labor is free, who are doing this for love, and they're not doing it to make a profit. They don't have to report back profitability to anybody else. So as we think about the social change, maybe the way for corporations to get involved is maybe help a few of those people who go out and give them a little money to do it, but wait until the business case is proved and then to scale it. The idea of these, the heart monitoring in India, the eye implants and everything, then you hand it to a company and let that transform into it.
And it turns out that these companies, in fact, so one of the companies, Arab and ICANN, is quite profitable, right? And I think that we have these three business models. Right? We have the traditional nonprofit leverage, where you go to the Clinton Global Initiative or Clinton Foundation, or you go to the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, you get money, right? And it's a very good model for a certain time. But we're seeing more of these hybrid business models and more of these for-profit business models.
But it does seem they're startups. This is not IBM doing these things.
But let me give you a couple of examples where IBM-like companies do.
Okay, great.
So there's this concept, and we go back to Bhaskar's point about HBR, right? So there's a very current concept around reverse innovation. And what we're seeing is in the globe today, right? The US and the EU are flat, if not negative. And we're seeing some of the most iconic global brands saying we need to tap into the growth of new markets. So let me give you a few examples of where that's worked really, really well. Medtronic, right? Long established medical device company, went and created a Heart Healthy for All program where they modeled the Arab business. And they went into the community and they began to understand how they could develop devices and wrap services around that would be delivered at a price that would be afforded in the most poor rural villages. Okay, they're starting to scale that very dramatically. Another good example of that is GE. GE wanted to create a portable, battery-powered, rugged heart monitor, EKG machine, and they work backwards from a $200 price point. That's now leaking into business. And there are many examples of Unilever and others that see massive opportunity. And it's actually a very profitable business, and they're getting first mover, and they're bringing those innovations back at very different price points.
I think you're right. I think some companies are starting to do this. That's the Vijay Govardharajan has a book on this topic. But once again, what that is that's senior executives in the company saying, we're not going to make money on this right away. This is a bet we're going to place for the long term. And that's not natural for a lot of companies.
But isn't that what Amazon did with the cloud? I mean, at some point, a lot of times you got to make a bet on it. I mean, that's, God forbid if we're investing in businesses only if they're going to be willing to make a profit in the first quarter of the products.
Okay, gentlemen, as I recognize that this is going to be a challenge walking this conversation in a short period, if I may ask, the audience to kind of raise the questions. We are talking about HBR 2010. I would encourage HBR 2030. Right. So ask your questions. Really challenge these guys. These are the smartest guys in the room. So.
I am.
Sir, go ahead.
Right, so the first panel talked a lot about voice of customer, collecting relevant voice of customer, and then building solutions and products which will be successful, right? But for social entrepreneurship, for the bottom of the pyramid, how do we do the voice of customer right? How do you know what product or service at the right price point, the right features is going to be successful? Let's project 10, 20 years ahead, and there's competition for the same client and customer base or market. How is the right voice of customer going to be collected from the bottom of the pyramid?
You're asking me?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I give the example of this company called BioLight Stove. The BioLight Stove, based in New York City, sent a PhD to literally live in the rural villages, in the countries where the product was actually going to be used. And he was able to discern very strong cultural differences about how cooking was done across many different states in India, and how different it might be even in states in India, how dramatically different that would be in countries in Africa, and how dramatically different that would be in countries in Latin America, right? So they are building their business model based on serving the bottom of the pyramid. That is exactly what they're doing. Now they are also creating a second business, which is a camp stove. And a camp stove is for more health-oriented people that are you and I. If we're going to go camping in the Adirondacks this weekend, you're going to see an ad in the Wall Street Journal for their camp stove. But they really see that bottom of the pyramid as a real, legitimate market opportunity, and they want to seize that.
Mike, and if I may apologize for butting in, I know that we are running into a massive time problem for everyone in the audience and on the panel. I know, Fernando, you have a hard stop. If you have any closing comments.
No, that's fine. I don't have a hard stop. I'm just thinking that, people start at 6.
So if anybody has a hard stop, please, raise your question and maybe you get an answer. Otherwise, I don't know, if we have the flexibility to just continue the discussion.
Or we can certainly. I did want to take questions from you.
I do want to respond. I want to say one more thing in support of what Mike was saying on that. Very much these examples that we're hearing about the social entrepreneurship, and I haven't studied them as much as Mike has, are very much voice of the customer. But they're doing what we heard earlier. It's not what do you want. It's what challenges do you have that you may not even know that are challenges that need to be solved, and then somebody taking a creative approach to solving those.
Okay, there's a question right here.
This is a question. My name is Ram from EMCA. Question to the panel, and I have Alison sitting next to me as well, so feel free to chime in on this. I wonder why many companies don't follow the Google model, which is, when you talk about innovation, the practical innovation, I feel like Google has gotten it right, where they have a startup within a large company, right? So if they want to solve a problem, they basically identify, if I come up with a problem, they basically let me go on. Right? And of course, there are guardrails around it, like there cannot be a science project. But I feel like that's a better model for innovation, where I build the startup within a bigger company. In many cases, even though the companies say that they want to innovate in a startup way, next thing you know, you have 20 people coming up. And as Steve Jobs says, innovation cannot be done by companies.
Yeah, I mean, my reaction is that Google is using the 3M model, which is around for a long, long time. But if you look at the number of businesses that Googlers have created, they really aren't, the track record isn't terribly successful. So it's sort of, I'm going to devote 10% of my time to coming up with a cool project. And a lot of Googlers, right, they feed you breakfast, lunch, and dinner, they do your dry cleaning, they deliver your groceries. I mean, you're there 80, 90 hours a week. There are a lot of burden. And that 10 hours turns out to be another 40 hours. But I haven't seen the track record of success of a lot of businesses.
So it's interesting. I was interviewing some people at Google when I was doing some of my innovation research, and I said, you know, is there like a day a week, this 20% thing, or when does this happen? And they laughed. They said actually 20% is like Sunday night, all night. And when you see the ideas that have worked inside Google, they're tremendously innovative people pulling together their own networks to just make this through the sheer force of their personality making these happen. Those are special people. Many companies, we've beaten that out of people in large companies, where they're not able to do it. So where I've seen these kinds of white space ideas working, often the organization needs to give them a little bit of help. So if you've got really technical people who have a great idea, maybe the organization can get together and give them some marketing people to help out, to help seed these ideas that wouldn't be able to start it on their own. And then you can make those happen.
Let me just make a big comment. Actually, I wouldn't be too worried, Mike, about the many projects not working, because that's actually the essence of innovation. I mean, I think that's precisely what Google does. That they actually are not afraid to make these bets. I think there's another reason why you don't see many companies following the Google model. Is because in Google you have these three people at the top, Green, Larry Page, and Smith, that actually are very committed to innovation. And not only that, when they did the IPO, if you remember, they actually set it up in such a way that they actually can make the bets. So there is actually also a legal situation there at Google that allows them to be very risk-taking. And I think that permeates throughout the organization. Most organizations are not like that. And so you get into this whole process, it's more rigid that we have discussed before.
Yeah, and I just want to add kind of one thing. We completely agree with Fernando, which is that there's a trap of us coming back with the same iconic examples over and over again, the Google model, the Apple model, and so on. Each one of them has some very idiosyncratic elements. Google, it's very easy for you to develop a prototype, put it up on the web, and get a customer feedback, run a beta for a while, and then kill it as soon as the data doesn't support it. You can't do that if you're making, tractors. So we've got to be thoughtful about how to generalize with individual iconic companies, and certainly the management model is very, very good. If you have a question.
Yeah, I did. Two points, I think. The first one is we're increasingly building tools, methodologies which are beginning to be available to everybody so that they can bang out a business plan, they can bang out a prototype. But when there's a book which was written in the 60s or 70s called Breakthrough Innovations, the story inside there was two people in every company, personality pushed it all the way up to make something happen. And so we've increased the number of quote-unquote, I'm going to put them in quotes, entrepreneurs who can easily bang out a business concept or a business plan. But when you really look at it, it's part of the personality of the teams and people that can make it happen. So one is, how do you get that personality to be taught? This is a question. Not the business plan writing, it's so easy to do. And the second piece of this thing here is, I do think we are seeing a change which is happening out there where there is businesses on social entrepreneurship increasing more and more. And there's a heart and a soul entering in where the value proposition is not just profit, it's profit and making the world a better place. And we're seeing that part. The first part I'm more interested in. How do you get a personality and teach that? Not the business plan outright.
So I think those so many of the breakthrough innovations that we hear about are not Apple driving it top down, but they're just pure accidents that got built by somebody else. And I don't know, can you teach personality? I'm not sure, but you can certainly make it safe to be that personality. And in addition, you can also help people who don't quite have that personality take the ball a certain distance forward and help them out. So when I see, one of the things I love about the IBM EBO process and some of the other things that we've seen in other companies is the idea is out there, but then the company gives them a lot of support. And often actually will appoint a different product manager to drive this thing forward. And that's great because you get to do the handoff, but you still get the big breakthrough win in the end.
Just to add to that, just want to make sure. The trouble is now there are more quote-unquote innovators in companies with business plans which are very sexy, very attractive, glossed over with nice packaging, which is easy to do. And how do you differentiate between those two things? And suddenly you're getting crowded out by too many good-looking ideas, but not necessarily good-looking ideas with a good-looking team.
Well, there's certainly tournaments like EFC runs, but in the end, the way that I would suggest that you vet these ideas is show me the money. have you seen a real experiment that shows real value? And then that speaks for itself. And otherwise, you're just a lot of paper, and there's a lot of paper out there.
Yeah, and I think, Bhaskar, you're right. I mean, it's easy with software. I mean, Allison is doing this all day, every day, and do it. But obviously, when you're doing pharmaceuticals, it's a little bit more difficult when you're building tractors. Yeah.
But this distinction between good-looking ideas and a good-looking team is an interesting one to to sort of think about as you go back home. If you ask any of the top venture capitalists and you ask them what do you invest in, they don't necessarily invest in the next big thing. They invest in a next big team. And so that's a provocative thought. There are questions?
Yeah, I had a quick question. When you talk about being in a world characterized now by finite resources, how does environmental strategy play into innovation and reverse engineering and end-of-life engineering cycles?
Addressing anybody, asking anybody?
Anybody.
Okay. I don't have a crystal ball.
The easy answer is when the green is also more efficient. And a great example is the EMC story. They found a way that you can take the boxes that these equipment come into, fold them down flat, put them on a pallet, and ship them back home for free. And EMC saves because they don't need to remake those boxes. And the world is better because you're not recycling those boxes. When you can get those win-wins, it's great. The harder ones I'll leave to Mike to answer.
I think also there's also a question of how technology evolves. I mean, I think if you look at what's going on in electricity grid, for instance, where we get to smart grids and all stuff, that's going to change the way. So I think for some of those innovations, we need some infrastructure first so that the mentality of people can change. And that is a win. So I think part of the answer is what you're saying, and part of the answer also is that we need to set up some infrastructure and get sometimes prices right. Because I mean, a lot of times we're not, we're not paying for the externality of different things generated. So I think there's a whole bunch of legal issues, infrastructure issues that will solve that.
So I think it's we've come to a point where it's time to call for a wrap. I'm sure these are conversations that I hope are only beginning here, and there are various other mechanisms where these discussions can go on. I just want to kind of make one final comment on your question. I'm a bit of a skeptic on many of these sustainable innovation issues, because ultimately it all comes back to the economics. If the price of fossil fuel goes down, then no matter how good people's intentions are, there isn't going to be support for it. We're basically seeing the solar industry go to a massive overcapacity situation, and that's going to be a problem for this industry. This is actually an excuse for me to bring back sex at the end of this session. Sex in the city, a lot of it is happening in very, very tiny quarters, basically in slums, in a favela in Rio de Janeiro, or a slum in Mumbai, or in Nairobi or Manila. And there's a lot of essentially sustainable innovation that is happening there, simply because you have no other option. You have no other option. And that's where the future is going to be. So let's not look at, I think EMC, Intuit, IBM, they're all going to do fantastic things. But if natural gas takes off in the United States and elsewhere, I'm sorry, green technology is basically dead. But green technology is going to come back in that favela and Rio de Janeiro. And if that's where you want to work, that's where you need to go. So thank you, and I don't know if any closing comments.
Thank you, Bhaskar. George and Fernando and Bhaskar, you did amazing. I also want to take 1 minute just to thank everybody. This event was co-created. So Allison, when we talked to her, we got some ideas. We talked to Steve Todd over there, we got ideas. We talked to Mary, we got ideas. So this was really a group think and a group act. And I really want to thank everybody, because the entire panelists, we had 11 speakers, and then the team and everybody put it together. And Mike, thank you very much for pulling it all together. And I also want to thank you, all of you, for coming. And I know it was a long session, but we really wanted to get this done. And we have it on tape now, so we can actually share it with your global centers, whether it's in Bangalore or in China or in Brazil or in the UK. And so also the Hult students, they have been. We did not have internet in this room on Monday afternoon, and we are able to live streaming. That's innovation for you. So thank you very much.
Thank you, guys.